when you can communicate in such a way that you can empower patients to become more independent, which I think is fundamental to everyone's needs. That's what I've learned throughout and I've seen it obviously with my dad's situation. I think at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be so independent.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. My guest today is a physiotherapist in Windsor, Ontario. She's also a very accomplished author, speaker, and podcaster with a compelling message about how we communicate as caregivers. So thanks for joining me today as we hear Jennifer George tell her story. I am speaking today with Jennifer George, author, speaker, podcaster, and last but not least, physiotherapist up in chilly Windsor, Ontario. Jennifer, it's great to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Randy.
Well, you were so kind to have me on your podcast just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a great experience, and I'm looking forward to a similarly entertaining experience today.
Me too.
And regular listeners to our podcast will know that I like to get the origin story. So let's begin right there. Have you always been a resident of Windsor, or where did you actually get your start?
I actually grew up in Leamington, Ontario, which is actually the tomato capital of Canada. We're known for agriculture out in Leamington, and that's about 45 minutes away from here in Windsor. And then I went to school, did my university schooling in Windsor, Ontario, and then also did my master's in physical therapy in London, Ontario, which is a couple hours east and north from Leamington. Yeah, so I went to the University of Western there for my physio training.
And let me ask you, where did the inspiration to get into physiotherapy come from?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about this without going too far back, knowing you would ask. So when I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I had kind of a physical health transformation, I guess you could say. I was very athletic. I was very active. I experienced almost like a hormonal surge and combined with stress of being a teenager. And I put on quite a bit of weight. And one day I literally looked down at the scale. I was tipping the scale at 189.9 pounds, and I'm 5'3". So it was, and it was kind of interesting that I had the foresight to even put that all together and just realize I wasn't comfortable in my skin at that time. And I thought, oh my goodness. And it was just a huge wake up call for me. And I got more physically active, but not in the sense of just sports and recreation that way. It was more like, actively working out. I monitored my food intake and what I was eating, the quality of food. And I ended up losing and have sustained it ever since.
And you were how old when you were doing this?
I was going into my grade 11 year. So I would have been like 16, 17 at the time. And it was
That's quite an accomplishment for a teenager.
Right. And I don't think I realized that until now, actually, as I reflect back on it, because I've sustained it ever since. And a lot of the practices, like drinking water, I've been doing ever since then. Yeah, it's kind of wild how that happened. It was a blessing in a way for me.
I guess so. And I'm sure I don't have to point out to you that there are a lot of teenagers, particularly teenage girls,
Mhm.
who become dissatisfied with their body image along about that time. And it turns into a really terrible problem,
Yes.
anorexia and bulimia. But
Hmm.
you actually, it sounds like you put some science into it and did all the right things and have maintained it. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. It really was for me to naturally put that together, not really having that guidance. Otherwise, it was just very intuitive, I guess, and just knew what I needed to do for me.
And I was going to ask, are there medical types or were there medical types in your family, or were you the first person to get into the healthcare space?
Yeah, no, I was the first person. I have a lot of educators in my family, but in terms of healthcare and medicine, no, I'm the only one.
And so it was this sort of physiological transformation that you think led you to physiotherapy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but not knowing it then. So at that time, I had to start applying to university. So this is kind of where it gets a little interesting too, because I started applying to university and I thought I wanted to be a pharmacist, considered that. I considered psychology and I considered women's studies at the time. Those were my three choices. And I applied. Then I took a fitness class because I had been becoming more active, right? And experiencing weight loss and feeling healthier. And during that, I was nominated for a kinesiology book award from the University of Windsor. So they had recognized something, or my teacher had
Mm-hmm.
put some kind of referral in for that. And then I thought, well, I had no idea what kinesiology was at the time. And yet I was doing it. And so I was like, oh my God, this is what I love, the science of human movement. So I changed my requests, my university program requests, and I ended up switching to kinesiology. And I was luckily accepted and able to do that. And then when I got into kinesiology, I was like 22. I was young. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was nearing the end of that. And I was top three in my class. And I remember my guidance counselor in university saying, Jen, you're top three. You need to go to medical school. Like, you need to apply to medical school. And he was just really trying to push that. And it just wasn't for me at the time. And then I learned more about like the allied professions, and physiotherapy just spoke to me because it was the science of human movement and healing
Sure.
through movement for me. So, yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to pick your brain just a little bit about why medical school didn't seem to have any appeal.
It's a great question. um, Back then, for me, I just knew the demands on physicians. I just knew it was a 24-hour operation. And
Mm-hmm.
I think back then, what I thought I wanted for my life was a little more consistency. I wanted just kind of, I don't want to say a 9 to 5, but I did want like my evenings, let's say, my weekends, that type of thing. So that was kind of what I had envisioned at the time. I
And
do toy
again,
with it
that's
still, though, Randy. I'm not going to lie to you.
well,
You never know.
I'm
Never
really
know.
impressed with the degree of foresight that you had at that point. I think if most of us are honest, in our 20s, we are not particularly loaded with wisdom. And for you to have thought through it that carefully is, again, very impressive. And again, I hear you saying that perhaps it's not entirely out of the question, and I don't think it should be.
Thanks.
We
Thank
we,
you.
we see quite a number of latecomers in freshman medical classes nowadays, and they always make fabulous physicians.
Oh, that's good to hear, actually. That's reassuring.
They've thought it through. But let's get back to what really happened.
Hmm.
And when you got into the master's program, did you feel like you had really found the perfect fit? Was it everything you expected?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my program. I thought it was very intense. It was very strenuous, and I had a hard time adapting, just moving away further from home, for example. And the course load was just double what it normally is in undergrad. So it was just a lot at once. But yeah, I learned a lot. It was a 2-year program, and there was, other than your placements, there there were no breaks, and Christmas, let's say, I think that was it as well. So it was very fast. It was done in the blink of an eye. And it was during my second year of my master's that my father fell ill. So that changed everything too. What I had envisioned for my life as a physio kind of took a turn as well, and my dad
Yeah,
got
I'll
sick.
bet it did.
Yeah.
So tell us some more about that.
Yeah. So I started physio school in 2005, and the summer of 2006, I was on a placement, and I was back home on a placement and living with my parents for the summer while I was on a placement there. And my dad just wasn't feeling well. And I'd always been very aware that my mom and my dad were very independent. I was very grateful because they were older than the average parents for someone my age. They were in their 60s at the time. And my dad just wasn't feeling good one day, and he went to the clinic, and he had come back with an antibiotic for what they thought was a throat infection. I wake up at 3 a.m. to him vomiting, like projectile vomiting. Like, it woke me up. And I thought to myself, maybe it was just a side effect to the antibiotic that he had just gotten. And so I decided to wake up because I heard my mom with him. And my mom was kind of like, what is this? What's going on? Like, I could just hear the uncertainty and fear in her voice. So I woke up, made my way down the hallway, and I noticed my dad's bedroom lights were on. And my dad had these pure white sheets, and they were covered in blood, clots and clots of blood. And I was just, I could follow the blood trail to the bathroom basically. And I saw him hunching over the toilet with his hands just up against the wall, bracing himself, and smeared blood on the walls as well. And he had just
It's got to be pretty disturbing.
It was. I
to say
actually
the least.
It was very scary. And I thought, oh my goodness, like, I'm going to pass out. I literally thought I was going to pass out from what I had seen. So I made my way back to the bedroom. I called 911. And we eventually found out that my dad had end-stage liver cirrhosis, and they had to do, at that time, an esophageal varices. They had to band him up, and that he was good, and he was like his normal self again. Everything was fine, and we didn't really know the extent of liver cirrhosis. We knew my dad had it. He had been treating it with an antiviral med for many years, so he was being closely monitored. But I guess because it was end stage, like, he was probably at the 10-year mark at that time. And we didn't really know that. He always went to his appointments alone. I don't even think he really understood that there was like a definitive timeline for it, and that this could happen. So then that's when we found out. So I was so happy that he was feeling himself again. His energy levels were good. And I remember his doctor saying to me, like, this will happen again. And that was when we recognized, and it did. He hemorrhaged 3 or 4 more times after that, and thankfully never died. And then we found out he had actually liver cancer too. And then we kind of had to browbeat a little bit. We really advocated strongly.
I bet you did.
Yeah, for him to be on the transplant list after that. So it was quite a journey. So from 2006 to February of 2007, in my final year, he received the call that there was a matching liver in February of 2007.
So that had to be pretty exciting. That had to be a point of significant optimism for you, at least temporarily.
Yeah,
so,
we were very hopeful at that point because we knew he was dying, because he was becoming, more fatigued, and he was jaundiced, and he wasn't eating as much. Like, we knew he wasn't well. What was so interesting about that and the timing of it was I was in school in London there, and that's where they do the transplants. So that's where my dad's team was. And so at University Hospital.
So you were close by.
Right. So to me, Randy, it was just like, this is how it's supposed to be. So I thought, great, my dad's going to have his transplant. He's going to do the transplant, and then he can recover at my apartment. That's really what I thought. He would come home after, let's say, a week or two, and he would just recover here, and then he could do his outpatient visits from here. Like, to me, it just seems so fitting. Like, I just thought it was meant to be this way. So he went into that surgery. I went to school. I didn't even really get to see him through and through it, but my family did, obviously.
The transplant surgery we're talking about.
Sorry. He went into the transplant surgery. He was a little bit nervous, and he actually had said, and the thing about my dad is that he was very intuitive himself. And so my dad jokingly had said to the transplant doctor, I don't want to do this again. Are you sure you've got the right liver? Or something along those lines. And he was making
that's
a joke.
Reasonable.
But yeah, and I mean, he was just joking, and I mean, the doctor actually told him, you always have a choice, Jimmy, right? And we really didn't believe in the sense that we could wait any longer because we knew time was of the essence for
Sure.
him. So we took the risk, and from what we understand, the liver did come from a non-heart beating donor, which isn't as common. But they were hopeful that it would soften in his body and that it would work out okay. So they did the surgery. He got through it like a champ. There were residents watching it, medical residents from all over watching it because he was a little bit older than the average candidate at the time. And so within, I can't remember if it was 24 hours later, but I'll never forget, I walked into the ICU with my sister, and we just wanted to check in on him. And he opened his eyes, and we gave him the thumbs up, and he had such relief that he had gotten through it. We could tell. And then he closed his eyes at that point, and he never woke up after that. So we had found out, fast forward, that the liver wasn't taking like they thought. He went into multi-organ system failure. They couldn't wean him off the vent. Everything was just going downhill.
So this was, if I can get technical with you, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but this was not, if I'm hearing you right, this was not so much an episode of rejection as it was a poorly functioning transplant. Is that right?
Exactly. So that was one of the questions. So my dad's transplant surgeon is an amazing person. I felt like I could ask him that question because, I had actually asked him that specifically. I said, was it my dad who rejected the liver, or was the liver just not taking? Like it was just, and he said, no, it was the liver. So I appreciated that. And so at that point, he only had, they had to put him at the top of the nationwide list in Canada for a liver because he was going to die.
Sure.
He was shutting down so fast. And I was at home studying for an exam, praying that my dad would find that a donor would come through for him. So I'm trying to juggle school and finish school. And
I can't even imagine.
Well, it was tough because I mean, looking like I actually did fail my written exam the first time I wrote it because I didn't really study for it. I was so consumed with my dad's situation, and it was my dad's surgeon who actually advocated for me to write it again. I actually went to him, and he just knew everything we had been through. One of the most difficult times in my life, for sure.
I can imagine, but that's not the end of the story.
No, it's not. So a donor did come through, thankfully. And my dad underwent the second surgery. He was critical. He got through it though. And we were hopeful again. So you go on this roller coaster of emotions, as sometimes devastating news and then more hopeful news and then devastating news. So that's kind of what we were experiencing throughout this whole time. So basically, we were told he was stable but critical. And then one morning, they were just monitoring in the ICU, and they were still fully supporting him at that time with ventilation and everything. But then I got a call one day on my way to school that my dad had a seizure. So being in physio school and being almost done, I knew that was not a good sign because my dad didn't have any known neurological history of anything. Mm-hmm. And so he ended up having a seizure, and then neurology became involved. So now we have a neuro team who becomes involved, who doesn't really know my dad at all, basically hooked him up to EEG to assess. And they basically told us he had no neurological activity and that they recommended that we take him off of life support. So this was all happening super, super fast. Like I found myself mourning my dad all of a sudden in a way around the round table with my mom and my sister there. And thankfully, again, my dad's transplant surgeon, we call him an angel, actually. He was there during that discussion, and nobody really knew why this was happening. And that's what was so interesting. Like they assumed there was maybe a hypoxic brain injury, but again, I know these are risks of surgery, but nobody still really knew exactly what was happening or what could have happened, right? And I think holding on to that uncertainty for us was what gave us faith in a way. And the transplant surgeon said, you know what, his liver's doing well, actually. And it all just happened fast, the surgery and everything, right? So he said, let's just give him the weekend and let's see if he makes any recovery. And then later that night, he started to show signs of recovery neurologically. He started to respond to simple commands, squeezing the hand, things like that at the bedside. And his neurologist
Wow.
came back. Yeah, it was remarkable. And literally, the neurologist, I just quoted him. He said I was standing on one side of my dad. He was standing on the other, observing the EEG again. And he said, this is remarkable. Your dad's story should be documented. Never did I think I was going to be documenting it. At one point, he did say that, and that meant a lot to me. And then again, we became really hopeful, right? And then we really had no idea what we were in for and what my dad would be in for in terms of the course of his stay in hospital and the chronicity of his needs after. He really was assessed to be at long-term care level while in hospital, and he eventually came home a year to the day of his transplant to our house, and he knew who we were. Nobody expected him to walk, talk, eat, breathe again on his own or know who we were, and he was able to do all of that with some assistance, mind you, but he was able to do all of that.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. That's pretty astounding. Well, it's very astounding.
It is.
In a university center of that type, they're actually pretty good. Well, they're better than pretty good.
They're amazing.
At prognosticating about these sorts of things. A fairly profound turnaround, to say the least, but yet there was a great deal of work to be done. Mm-hmm. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
So he eventually came home, and so I was living in London at the time, just finishing up my schooling at that time. And my plan originally was to stay in London. I had done a placement in rheumatology, loved it there at St. Joe's Hospital. And again, that happened by chance because my dad happened to be at the hospital. So I wanted my placements in London at that time, and fell in love with rheumatology. But I also knew that I had a calling to go back home and help my mom take care of my dad. Mm-hmm. So that was what I did. So I went back home, and again, even at that time, I thought it would be short term. Wasn't expecting to be at home with them I moved out in 2016. So a long time, about 9 years that I was at home with them and my dad. I moved out in 2016 to be closer to work at that time. And my dad passed in 2018. So he lived like 11 extra years longer than anybody expected him to. And I really believe it was largely because of my mom. I think she carried him through a lot. And it's amazing because, his transplant team would refer to him as Lazarus, because they literally just had no medical explanation in a lot of ways for his recovery.
Yeah, I can believe that from what you've described. I'm sure that all of those very professional people were quite astounded.
Mm-hmm.
And as one would expect, this entire episode had to have had a profound effect on the person that you've become.
Yeah.
And in fact, it led to the book that we mentioned in the opening, which I was telling you earlier that I have read a good bit of it and am very much involved in it. It's a great piece of work.
Thank you.
But can you tell us about how that experience sort of took you into this next stage of being a very accomplished author?
Yeah. It's interesting, Randy, and this is something I might chat about later. But, when you look back, things start to become more clear. And I will never forget when I was in the ICU with my dad, the one day I went to visit him. And I knew he was going to start physio that day. And I was about to start practicing at some point. So I thought, well, I'll learn from a professional in the field. And then I'll see my dad as well and visit with him. And it was that moment with the physio that really shaped my practice. And I didn't even know it at the time. But I remember walking into the ICU room and my dad was just dangling at the bedside. He was sitting upright. He had the trach in still, and he was just kind of all over. He wasn't really following the commands of the therapist and the instructions. And the therapist was sitting on a stool in front of him. And I could sense the therapist was really frustrated with my dad. And so
the therapist thought that your dad was intentionally being obstreperous, or
I don't know if it was intentional, but I think they were just making it about themselves in a way. They
I
were just so
see.
busy. I just sensed that they just didn't have time to
Sure.
kind of help settle him or just to be there with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had walked in and the therapist had said to me, I need you to think like a therapist and not like his daughter. What would you do in this case?
Really?
And yeah, that's what was said. And this is not even something I remembered that much until my dad passed. And I wrote my book because I wrote the book after he passed. And all of these things came back to me. And they really did shape my practice. And I remember saying to the therapist, I looked at my dad and I looked at the therapist. I couldn't believe I was asked that. Like, I was kind of like, oh my God, like, how can I
Well, I can tell you
divide
that
the
I'm
two?
shocked.
Yeah. Like, how do you not like think like his daughter? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do I just not be my dad's daughter? Like, it just didn't make sense to me. I was just so caught off guard. And I said, well, I
Yeah.
am thinking like a therapist, and I would continue to treat according to his goals, the patient's goals, or until the doctor told me otherwise, or there's something else medically coming up. Right. And that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of my response. And I've actually committed to that ever since. But again, not knowing it, that's actually what shaped my practice in terms of empathizing and listening and just being present and compassionate. It's such a huge part of my practice.
Well, it had to have been a really profound experience for you, and I can understand how it easily could have been, and apparently has been,
Mm-hmm.
life-changing or at least life-shaping for you. The book is called, and I love this, Communication is Care, 9 Empowering Strategies to Guide Patient Healing. Communication is Care.
Mm-hmm. It is care.
Expound on that for us.
Maybe I can share a story with you if that will help. This happened recently. I was working with a patient and he had a fall, and he was a young guy. And more than anything, his pride was hurt. So I had a student at the time who was with me, and I said, okay, so and so had a fall. We're going to talk with him about the fall. And part of physio, the goal is to kind of minimize fall risk. That's one of the biggest things that we try to do.
Sure.
So at first, the patient was a bit closed off. He didn't really want to talk about it. Just again, he had said he was just kind of embarrassed by it. And I just reassured him and let him know he had severe ataxia. And I kind of let him know. I just said, this is a very common thing. Falls are very common, and they're very possible for everyone. They can happen. And if we talk about it, then we can help you prevent it from happening again. So he felt more comfortable in sharing at that point, and we went through it. He explained everything, and he felt so much better talking about it. But I will say it probably took us a good half an hour to just chat about it. And my sessions generally are 45 minutes to an hour that I get in hospital with my patients. So my student and I, so after that happened, we got into physical treatment after that. And my student and I were doing our stats. And my student said to me, he goes, Jen, so technically, do I just document that we only did a half an hour of therapy because we talked for about a half an hour with so-and-so about the fall? And I turned to my student and I said, well, don't you think communication is care too? Did you think that was healing for him? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that counts. Like it's still time counted, even though it wasn't physical therapy in a way. For me, that's what I mean by communication. It's connection, it's interaction, that's healing for patients.
It's profoundly effective when you see it. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And that was,
Yeah.
he didn't have a fall after that. And he was able to go home, and he actually reached out even when he got home, and just to let us know he was okay and that things were going okay. So it's when you can communicate in such a way that you can empower patients to become more independent, which I think is fundamental to everyone's needs.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've learned, and I've seen it obviously with my dad's situation. I think at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be so independent.
The subtitle, 9 Empowering Strategies to Guide Patient Healing, and then that sort of translates into 9 chapters, which I think is really brilliant. And for just a moment or two here, I'd like to pick your brain about some of those that I found particularly compelling. Define and align your purpose.
Yes.
How do you go about doing that?
That's a good question. I really have found that our well-being matters. It's part of the intervention. It's part of the interaction with our patients. And when we are burned out, when we are stressed and overwhelmed, and we have lost our sense of self, it shows in our interactions with patients. It comes out in some way. And we also see burnout and self-reported errors from healthcare providers as well. That's a known fact. And so for me, defining and aligning purpose is really starting with my intention to practice. What is my purpose for being here? And for me, it's bigger than just a paycheck, right? It's bigger than job security. It's impact. And so for me, that reflecting and setting my intentions is really important, and just having my own self-care regimen, things like gratitude and play and creativity. Those are big parts. And obviously movement for me is really important, and meditative as well. Yeah.
I kind of have the feeling that if you can't do that, if you can't define and align your purpose, that's just about a guaranteed path to burnout right there, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a big reason why there is burnout. I think providers are not feeling aligned with where they're at, and also with their own sense of self. Yeah. So the idea of that chapter is more to look at your personal purpose and also your professional purpose, and bringing those two together, and hope they align. And it's not an easy thing. It sounds simple, but it's not. It's a lot of inner work.
So let's look at another one. Practice with compassion and empathy. Is that something that you find sort of blatantly absent in the world that we practice in today? I mean, we would like to think all of the healthcare providers on the planet are empathetic and compassionate, but is it rare?
I don't know that it's rare. I just think it's not given the weight that anything else is given, right? Like in terms of other skill sets. I think it's important to recognize that our ability to empathize and our ability to then provide compassionate solutions and get into action and service that way for our patients is just as equally as important as just administering an intervention of some sort without that empathetic connection, I guess you could say.
I think you're absolutely right about that.
I hear comments from patients sometimes, just describing their care experiences, and they'll say something along the lines of, I really liked that provider. And they can't really say why, but they just had a connection with them. You know what I mean? And I think it's just that extra that is easily sensed by others more than I think we recognize.
And that kind of leads me into, and I'm not going to dissect every chapter in your book
Sure.
because I want everybody to read it, but it sort of leads into the very next one on the list, and which is to listen presently and completely. There is a lot to digest in that little instruction.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think comes with difficulty to most people, or is it just a matter of being conscious of this is what you need to do?
Both. I think definitely being conscious of it is hugely helpful. I think that's one of the, like, listening for me is one of the things that I know consciously I am always trying to improve on. And
Sure.
yeah, and I think in combination with just like actively listening, for example, what I mean by being present is not feeling like you're being pulled in other directions when you're in the presence of a patient as much as possible. So if I'm in the presence of a patient, I'm not thinking about the next person that I have to see at 10 o'clock. I'm trying to stay as present as possible to the person who I'm with, because if my mind's all over the place, I know I'm really not taking in everything that I should be
Sure.
taking in. So I think being just aware helps for sure.
Yeah, and that unquestionably requires some effort. I don't think there's anybody employed in the healthcare space that doesn't have a lot of demands.
Yeah.
And when that hangs over your head, to be able to isolate yourself from that and focus on the person right in front of you takes a significant amount of conscious effort to do exactly that. Was was the writing of this book? Do you think it was therapeutic for you at all?
Definitely. I think that that was a big part of it. My dad had died in May of 2018, and I wrote this book. I started writing the book in October of 2018. And it was definitely my way of staying connected to him, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because it was when it happened, when I made the decision to write it, it was like it just came to me so clearly. It was like everything I ever experienced personally and professionally came
It
together. And
reads that way. Yeah,
yeah,
it looks sort of effortless on the page.
yeah, and that's exactly how it felt. So it didn't take me very long to write. I knew very clearly what the 9 strategies were going to be. Like, I saw that, and I looked forward each day, coming home after work and writing. Sometimes I would write like once a week, and I would just write a big chunk at once. But it did come very effortlessly in a way because I had experienced it. A lot of it was my
Mm,
real life experiences, and it was my way of staying connected to my dad, but it was also my way of reminding myself to never lose sight of the bigger picture of why
yeah,
I'm practicing, and why my patients are there as well.
good for you. And I know you're blogging now. Do you think there'll be more books?
I think I will write another book. I'm waiting almost. I don't know if I'll get that same call like I did for this one. I've been waiting for that inspiration, I guess you can say. But I
Yeah.
have been writing because I love to write. I've always told myself I would write a book. I never knew at the time what it would be. So when I wrote this book, I knew for sure I was going to be writing it, and I didn't hesitate at all. And now I'm just kind of, I'm writing, but I don't have a clear picture yet. But I know it'll come.
Sure. Well, I will look forward to that one.
Thank you.
You're also podcasting. Tell us about the
Yes.
podcast.
So the podcast evolved from the book in a way. So I wrote my book, launched it in July of 2019. And then in the fall of 2019, I thought about the book and I thought, well, I could be doing more for providers. Okay. And, my whole life, when I started practicing, I've been on both sides of the system and I still am, right? Just personally and professionally. And so I wanted to support providers more because I could sense this shadow looming over healthcare. This was pre-COVID. And I could sense there was this dark shadow over healthcare and that providers were burning out. They were struggling. And I thought, if I could just do something. So I started the podcast more to support providers, as opposed to just kind of patient care experiences. But it's a combination of both. So it's a podcast to help healthcare providers manage stress, prevent burnout, take care of themselves, show up as as their best versions of who they are so that they can create the best patient experiences. Because ultimately it's for that provider whose intention is doing that, is to be there for patients and provide the best experiences possible. And one of the sources of burnout is feeling like we're not having that impact sometimes, and kind of diving into that.
Well, again, much like the book, I have found the podcast to be really valuable. Sometimes it's just you talking to us.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's you talking to a guest. But the ones that I've sampled, they have always been worth the time. So thank you for that, and congratulations on your success.
Thank you, Randy. And thanks for listening to it too. Appreciate that.
Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation. And what I would like to do at this point is get out of your way and let you have an opportunity to speak from your own soul. So I'm going to close my mic, and we'll all listen very intently while Jennifer George gives us her prescriptions for success.
I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Randy. So my prescriptions for success, the first one is reflection and intention. I think if you've been listening to my story, I think finding our way forward, we can connect the dots looking back. We can't predict the future. We don't know what the future holds, but in reflecting, what I would love for people to do is kind of think of a time in their life where they felt most at ease. If you're struggling right now professionally where you're at, can you think of a time where maybe things felt like they were in place, and what was going on in your life then? Be non-judgmental about your reflections, be open, just think of it as just kind of getting to know yourself a little more closely. And oftentimes the answers are just in our own story. Intention is the other part of that. So intention is more about our purpose for practicing. And for me, intention is just bigger than you. So as I'd mentioned earlier, it's bigger than job stability. It's bigger than a paycheck. What is your purpose for practicing? There's a greater force there. And imagine someone like your patient maybe asking you, what is your purpose for being here today, in their presence? And that might give you some idea as to what your intention might be, and to remain true to that moving forward. Another thing is taking our ego out of it as healthcare providers, coming from a place of purpose and intention to practice and be there for patients, rather than practicing out of fear or worry or insecurity, or fear that someone is trying to find fault. And just understanding that if you can be on the side of practicing in the best interest for your patients, then you have nothing to fear. I think it's really important to not make our patients' decisions as well about us. So recognizing that it's not about us, and that we are doing enough as long as we are informing patients and we're keeping them safe and we have their well-being at heart. The decisions they make are theirs to make. Number 3 is trusting your inner guidance. I think our inner guidance with our competency combined is so powerful. And I think that's what makes our experience in healthcare so unique and so purposeful for us. Every decision that I've ever made as a professional, whether it was good or whether it was not so good and poor looking back, it was because I either didn't trust my gut and my inner guidance, or because I did. And oftentimes when I did, it led to more favorable outcomes and fulfillment with my practice. Number 4, I just want you to know that if you're struggling right now in the workplace, one of the things I do talk about on my podcast is toxicity, and healthcare can be, ironically, a very toxic environment sometimes. So all it takes is just one trustworthy connection in your workplace or in your profession, or if you're on social media and you have, support groups. All it takes is one powerful connection in healthcare to sustain you through the hard times and to find fulfillment and joy in your work again. And finally, my last recommendation, because I am a writer and I love to write, I would love to see healthcare providers tap into their creativity more. I used to think I wasn't creative, oddly enough. And what I do know now for sure is that every healthcare provider is creative. We have creativity in us because healthcare is an art as well at the end of the day. And so I would love for you to think about what is something that you can do that you find yourself losing track of time with, and whatever that might be for you, to do more of that and to add more of that into your life. And you will see in doing that just this expansion happening around you and greater fulfillment with your overall being. So those are my 5 prescriptions for success. I hope they will help you as they've helped me through my journey.
There is a lot of wisdom there, Jen, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here to share with us. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you and where they can find the book.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. So my website is jennifergeorge.co. My podcast is called The Healthcare Provider Happy Hour, and it's on all platforms. My book, Communication is Care, is available. If you just Google it, it's available everywhere, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and it's available in ebook format or in paperback format.
And it's a good book. I was just going to offer, I downloaded it from Kindle. Within less than a minute after getting the title, I was already reading, and it's a really great piece of work. So once again, Jennifer George, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciated it. It was fun.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Remember, you can get more information about our guests as well as hear them face my rapid-fire questions at our Patreon site. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, and hopefully offer suggestions on what you'd like to hear in future episodes. Thanks very much to Ryan Jones, who composed and performs our theme music. That's all we have for now. So please, be sure and fill your prescription for success with my next episode.